Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 2, Episode 22. Today is Tuesday, May 26th, 2015. My name is Graham Perrow. With me, as always, are Tyler Fitch and Melissa Daphne. Thanks for joining us today on a bit of an unusual day. We had some scheduling issues yesterday and Sunday, so today worked out pretty well for all three of us, so we're glad you can join us. Lots to talk about today. Obviously, the finals are set, so we'll talk about those games and what we see coming up in the finals this coming weekend, or starting this coming weekend. We have some news from the league. Minnesota is moving. Edmonton may be moving. Cody Jamieson is injured. Tyler Richards has retired. A bunch of stuff. So let's get. I guess we'll quickly talk about the semifinals first. We'll get to the games later, but if for some reason you're watching the show and don't know what happened, which seems unusual, Toronto and Edmonton will be meeting in the finals after Toronto took out Rochester last weekend and Edmonton took out Calgary. This is the first all-Canadian finals in NHL history, which seemed to me to be a little surprising. In fact, I had to go back and check just to make sure. I saw 2 or 3 people tweet it, and I had to go and check, and sure enough, it's the case. This is also the first time since 2009 that the regular season division champs will actually meet in the finals. That one was New York and Calgary won that one. So, like I said, we'll get to the games a little later. Both games involve the mini game or the extended overtime or the tiebreaker or whatever you want to call it. We've been calling it the mini game because that's what they called it last year, but the league seems to be referring to it as the tiebreaker game this year. So we may bounce back and forth to what we called it, but you'll get the idea. First news item to get to. I don't actually remember what order these were announced in, but let's go with Minnesota first. The Minnesota Swarm have announced that they are definitely relocating for the 2016 season, saying that I think part of it is the arena deal. It's just getting too expensive, and just life in general, I suppose, is too expensive for the Arlotta gang. Yeah, they've been talking about this for a couple of years. They sent out a fairly famous letter to their season ticket holders last year saying that if we don't increase the season ticket base, we're likely going to have to move because we can't afford to keep doing this. And of course, we all know that as soon as a player gets too expensive for them to keep, regardless of how good he is, they have to trade him. That's what happened to Ryan Benesh. That's what happened to, anybody that they've traded for the most part. So obviously they've been dealing with financial issues for a while, and I guess they just can't do it anymore, which is kind of unfortunate because they're not the worst. They don't have the lowest attendance in the league. They have a fairly rabid fan base of, I think they're averaging 7,000 or 8,000 people per game, which is pretty good. Maybe the arena is just too expensive. I don't know what the answer is. Melissa, do you know anything more than that?
I haven't heard anything, but it would be interesting. I wonder if they have approached the Wild to see if they're interested. I know that I read something where it said that Minnesota said that with all the NHL stuff, since they're so low on the priority list, they were looking at a lot of Sunday and Friday games, which fans have complained about, and so there was a lot of factors going into it. I don't think any of us are unfortunately surprised. I know I'm disappointed. I've heard, people. I have a few friends who've gone up to games there that said it was a great experience, which you want, especially if you're a visiting fan. And it just seemed, I've had experience with their fans that have come to Denver. It's just, they seem, like you said, very passionate. And I feel bad when it's a team that only has 2,000 fans that's losing a team, but when you hear of one that's seems like they're in pretty solid ground, still not able to make it work, it's definitely kind of sad. I would like to see them stay in Minnesota. I don't know, if they're rumored to go elsewhere. Maybe they're looking at the NHL teams, but it doesn't seem like some of the areas they've proposed teams that are as strong with lacrosse. But who knows? Denver didn't start out that way either. What are your thoughts, Tyler?
I think, yeah, Graham mentioned the letter they sent to their fans, so it's not a total shock, but kind of a long time coming to this point. It's just that the leading indicator usually is like Sunday games. That's the point when their teams are getting Sunday arena dates that they are kind of going to be done, is what I'm learning repeatedly from other moves. It says on our notes that maybe Nashville is a consideration. That could be interesting. There wouldn't be a lot of competition there. So they could, I think the NHL team there, but other than that, I don't think they have too much going on because Minnesota also has an NBA team. I don't know. John Arlotta, their owner, he is incredibly dedicated to lacrosse. The Notre Dame field is the Arlotta field at Notre Dame University. So he's not just in it because it seemed like a fun thing to do. He's in it because he loves lacrosse. So I really hope that they're able to find a place to move to, and he will then keep the team going at that location. I don't think he really wants to give up on it at all. Bruce Urban, on the other end, I don't know if he has a huge lacrosse background so much as he tried to just, I don't know, buy whatever sports team he could around him, and so he got the Rush because that's where he's from, and he's not going to buy the Oilers, right? So I don't know what his commitment is, and I worry more about the Rush as being able to move. But I think Arlotta really wants to keep a team going. If something were to happen, I think very interesting to see what happens at the NL draft, because Minnesota has just numerous first-round picks for years to come, and if those picks are just basically voided because there's no team, all of a sudden we have like a 4-pick first round, that'd be kind of gonzo nuts mode. So I hope he finds a partner or some place to go and they keep playing, because I like their colors. I like the stuff they do. They'd be pretty cool to see going. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I certainly would have liked to have seen a game in Minnesota. It looks like a fun time. Now, of course, I'd like to see a game in every NL arena, but yeah, it's like you said, Melissa. It's unfortunate. I would really like to have seen it work in Minnesota. And like we said, from the attendance standpoint, I'm just looking at the numbers here. Colorado and Buffalo. This is home average attendance for 2015, not including playoff games. Colorado and Buffalo were just over 14,000. Well, Colorado was just under 15. Calgary was 11,600. Toronto was just over 10,000. Minnesota was next at about 8,700. So ahead of Edmonton, ahead of Rochester, and ahead of Vancouver and New England. So right smack in the middle. So it's hard to point at the fans for this one for sure. When you're looking at something like Anaheim or San Jose, when they're getting 1,700 people at a game, it's quite easy to say, well, it's just not popular enough. That doesn't seem to be the case in Minnesota. So yeah, I don't really have a better understanding of what went wrong there. And as you mentioned, Tyler, we have issues in Edmonton as well. We don't know for sure that they're moving, but Bruce Urban did do an interview with the local newspaper last week, saying that I think he said this is probably the end. Basically saying, I'm not announcing anything right now, but don't be surprised when the day after the finals finish, we're going to announce that. But first of all, in both cases, and we never mentioned this with Minnesota, this is really bad timing. I mean, who decides to make these kind of announcements during the finals? I don't know what these guys were thinking. I mean, obviously Minnesota's season is over, so maybe they figured, well, nobody cares if we announce. But it's taking attention and focus away from the playoffs and the finals, and that's what everybody really should be focusing on. So it's unfortunate that the timing of these. So anyway, Bruce Urban said that he's getting no support from the city. I guess the Edmonton's getting a new arena that the Oilers are going to be playing in. The Rush apparently have not been invited, or at least have not been part of those talks. Um, he mentioned some other things. He did mention one thing that, I invited the mayor down to a Rush game and never even got a reply. So that's how much the mayor cares about our team. And the mayor responded, like a day or two later. He responded saying, first of all, I get 1,500 invitations to events every year. You can't give me a tweet with 3 days notice and expect me to drop everything and get to a game. And he went on for a few other things, saying that they were in negotiations for sponsorship deals, and the Rush walked away from the table. So he can't really blame the city for that either. And any kind of issues he's got with the arena or with the Oilers have nothing to do with the city anyway. So it looks like any kind of negotiations between the Rush and the city are not going well. We already know that the Rush and the Oilers don't have a great relationship. And apparently there have been, we talked about this before, that there have been offers from the Oilers to buy the Rush, and Urban said no. I imagine that would probably be the best solution for the Rush in order to stay in Edmonton, would be for him to sell the team to the Oilers, because then they obviously have a bunch of infrastructure in place. It's working for the Mammoth, it's working for the Bandits, it's working for the Roughnecks. No reason it couldn't work for the Rush as well. It does mean that Urban wouldn't be involved, and maybe he doesn't want to give up on that, and you can kind of understand that. But if it means not having the team or moving it to Saskatoon or something, then you would hope he would bite the bullet and say, yeah, this is the best thing for the team, and sell it to the Oilers. But maybe he won't get that offer anymore. Yeah, Tyler, what are your thoughts on Edmonton?
The timing is just atrocious. And the team's trying to focus on winning a title, and he's completely distracting his own team with his things. I think Urban's probably smart enough that there's some reason he's mentioning it now to either find a partner or draw attention to the team and draw playoff attendance up, because he announced it, I think, right before the first round playoff game in Edmonton. So it's like everybody's talking about the Rush, and they have a game 2 days later, right? So as a marketing stunt, it's not terrible, but content-wise, it's a few things are worse, especially as a distraction to his team. Since he lives in Edmonton or Northern Alberta, he's not seemingly talking so much about moving, unless it was close by. I guess Saskatoon would be somewhere close by. But he wouldn't be like moving the team to Seattle or Portland, just as ideas where people wants to a certain degree. That he's not going to be a long distance owner in my mind. So in that sense, I'm pretty worried about their situation and what's going to happen. What do you think, Melissa?
I agree. This was bad timing, but Bruce Urban, obviously, you kind of see the persona he presents, but in some ways he seems like a petulant child. If he's not getting his way, he throws a bit of a temper tantrum, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I know he's passionate. A lot of owners and just business owners in general are, and they kind of wear their heart on their sleeve sometimes. So it could be that he's doing this to try and drive attendance or fire everybody up, like, hey, win the championship so we can stay, type of thing. But it is frustrating. It's frustrating that knowing that he has had options and he has had, like you said, the Oilers wanting to buy the team, and because he wouldn't be involved, it sounds so much like the whole thing with the Roughnecks. And I wonder if it's going to end the same way, where it comes down to, nope, you're leaving the team, and here is where the team's going. I don't know. I think it's bad for the league if we lose Edmonton, especially if they do win the championship. I mean, in fact, this is so much like how Arizona was with them in the Cup game and then folding, except Arizona didn't have good attendance. So it's interesting because for years everyone's been like, oh, Edmonton's going to fold, Edmonton's going to fold, Edmonton's going to fold. And Urban has been very vocal that this team is not going to fold. And so for him to come out and kind of say that right before his team is in the championship seems really odd, which makes you wonder if it is a strategic ploy of some kind for him. I don't know. It's frustrating. I think I would like to see if the Oilers did buy them because Calgary is owned by the Flames. So you definitely have that rivalry probably increase because you got the NHL and the NLL teams owned by the same organization. I would hate to see Edmonton go away. They've slowly become one of my favorite teams. I've been cheering them on even when they were losing, so I don't want to see them go bye-bye. So I hope Urban is able to, as you said, Graham, do what's good for the team, even if that means he has to take a step back. And I just don't know if Urban back.
One other advantage to the Oilers buying the Rush is that they could then use the term the Battle of Alberta once again without worrying about getting in trouble. Our next item, I guess we'll just touch on it here because we'll get to it during the talk about the Toronto-Rochester game. Cody Jamieson left the first division finals game after maybe 5 minutes or so, just hopped off the field and went straight to the dressing room and was not seen again. Other people reported seeing him in the arena with his ankle all taped up and on crutches. And then I have heard from a number of places other than the Nighthawks themselves that he's got a torn Achilles tendon, which is a big deal. He's going to be out for months. So obviously he's done for the season. Well, I mean, his team's done for the season now, so he missed Game 2 and the mini game. But yeah, I think I read somewhere that that's usually like a 6 to 8 month injury, so he's going to miss all of the Six Nations Chiefs season as well. So that's a big hit for the Nighthawks and was a big part of the reason that they lost this past weekend. But like I said, we'll get to that in a few minutes. The other bit of news that we were going to talk about, and Tyler, I'll let you address this one first, is the retirement of Tyler Richards.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to throw one more thing on Cody Jamieson. It's not just the Six Nations back-to-back Man Cups, but the World Indoor Lacrosse Championships will be in September, and the Iroquois Nation, he's their offensive leader. That's going to hurt. I had them penciled in for a silver medal for sure, and I'm not sure they can pull that off as easily now. I think U.S., with whatever goalie they can muster, and their roster will be able to give them a run, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well. All right, so Tyler Richards retired. Definitely a surprise announcement because of his age, but not a huge surprise because of the reason, which is concussions. He's had 3 in the last 5 years, and for his health and safety, he can't do it anymore. They said it was all shots off the face mask, which is occupational hazard. And I remember the one he had, I don't know if it was his first one, but the one he had in Everett, he said, like in the game, I think he was fine for a moment, but he got done with the game and he was just like in the shower throwing up because his head was so messed up. And I've had some concussions from playing lacrosse myself and never that bad, so I started feeling really grateful about the experiences I've had. And it's super sad to see the game taken away from him at such a young age, because goalies usually can age quite well. And I thought he had close to 10 years left in him. And so I'm really going to miss him. He was always fun to talk to. And I don't know, he brought the Stealth their only title. I busted out my T-Rich jersey for tonight. I never felt so small as putting on this jersey. I like to think I have kind of broad shoulders, but this is nothing. Man, this thing I'm swimming in. Melissa, what are your thoughts here? You've seen a few Mammoth players also have concussion issues.
Yeah, we lost Dan Carey and Jay Gilbert to concussion issues, which was definitely surprising with both of them, because I don't think at the time that's about when all the concussion stuff was really coming out. I was really surprised to see this news since he is only 28. But my husband and I were both discussing it really makes you wonder if it's a matter of the helmets, because he's one of the few players that still wears the outdoor style, and if those really aren't as protective for the indoor game. So it's definitely sad to see him go. He's been one of my favorite goalies to root against. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna do when Vancouver comes and plays. He was really strong in those early years, and I expected that we were gonna see him for a very long time. So to see him retiring before he's even 30 was quite a surprise, since we've seen goalies go so long. Although we did lose Nash to back injury, but it was definitely a surprise.
You'll be able to throw pennies on the field with Eric Penny being the heir apparent in Vancouver. Sure, that'll go over well with the league.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we're losing another player due to injuries this early in their career. As you mentioned, Melissa, Jay Jalbert and Dan Carey had similar issues. Merrick Thompson I think he only played 1 year. He might have played 2 in Philadelphia. Very highly touted rookie when he came in, and he had to retire really early for the same reason. Phil Sanderson, I think, was in his mid to late 30s anyway, but he got hit during a game and took himself out and never came back. And then there was the issue with Ken Montour in Buffalo, where he got hit. I believe it was a clean hit. I don't think it was a cheap shot or anything like that. It was just a player going in trying to score, and fell and hit him, and he finished the game and never played lacrosse again. I think he had to take. I believe he's like a kindergarten teacher or something along those lines, and he had to take a year and a half or 2 years off work or something like this. So, like you said, Tyler, different concussions can be very different in how they manifest themselves. I guess some people, have a headache for a week and then they're fine. Others are, their career's over. So luckily Richards hadn't gotten to that point, and he actually said in an interview that I heard this past weekend that he was not told by doctors, you have to retire. This was a personal decision. But I think he decided to make that choice before he got to the point where the doctor says you have to retire now. Because by the time the doctor says that, you may already have irreparable damage, and that's the last thing you want. So tough decision at age 28, but obviously we wish him all the best. Next item of news I will let Melissa address because this is from her hometown.
Yeah, it's actually some big one. For the first time ever, DU Pioneers made it to the NCAA championship game, and not only made it, they won. So good job by Tierney and the team, and there's several DU alum already playing in the NLL, like Jeff Snyder and Mark Matthews and Jeremy Noble. So I expect that we'll be seeing even more Pioneers playing in the leagues. So very exciting. I know everyone in Colorado is pretty happy, even if they don't follow lacrosse. It's like, oh, we got a championship. So pretty cool stuff.
I know one of the Pioneer players is Wes Berg, and he's I've seen I don't know how many tweets over the last couple of days talking about him and how unbelievable a player he is, and I've seen people saying, yeah, the Thompsons are pretty good, but they're nothing like this guy, which is saying something when you consider what the Thompsons have done. So I believe he'll be in the top of next year's NLL draft, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I guess depending on whether Minnesota's still around, we'll see where he goes. So that should be interesting. So congrats to DU on that. All right, so let's get on to the games of last weekend. We'll start out west with Edmonton, Calgary. Edmonton won game 1 last weekend, so they basically had to win game 2 in order to get to the finals, and they couldn't do it. Calgary came back and won this one 12-9, and then went to the tiebreaker. I actually only saw about the most of the second half. First half, I hadn't had a chance to watch it, but just looking at the score sheet, Calgary took a 3-0 lead after about half of the first quarter, and then Edmonton scored seven straight goals and took a 7-3 lead before the first quarter was even over. So this looked like it was going to be a runaway Edmonton win. And then they managed to score a grand total of 2 goals over the next 45 minutes, at which point Calgary came back. They scored 6 in the second, and they were shut out in the third, but it certainly was not the Edmonton runaway win that it kind of looked like it was going to be. So kudos to Calgary's defense for for totally shutting down the Rush in the last 3 quarters of the game. Tyler, did you see this game?
Yeah, great game to watch. Definitely surprising to see Poulin come in off really tons of rest. I mean, he plays practices and does warm-ups, but I don't think he's been in a game situation in a while. And he was full on Poulin wall mode and shut down those Rush in the second half. Along with that, the Rush defense, the Roughnecks defense was phenomenal. They had Mark Matthews locked out of the offense completely, and all the Rush offense really goes through him. Everybody gets a lot of points, but it goes through Matthews. He was being face guarded most of the time. I started watching in the second half because I realized they were falling apart. He wasn't touching the ball, so I was really keen on him and ignoring everybody else. And McBride was out at the restraining line, face guarding him, trying to keep him out of the offense, and it was really working. It did not work in the tiebreaker game. Matthews decided that was enough of that and just asserted himself into the action, got a couple goals, and made sure that his team was going to the finals. And so it's pretty impressive by the Roughnecks to shut him down like that, and equally impressive that in the equivalent of a TV timeout, because they go right into that overtime, that Matthews decided no more and made a situation where he could get open, get goals, and get his team to the next level. Did you get to watch this one, Melissa?
Kind of. I listened to the first half and I watched chunks of the third, but unfortunately the app was uncooperative, so I did not get to watch the whole game. But it was very interesting. The first half seemed, like you said, it was so dominant with Edmonton that it really did seem like they were just going to run away with it. So to have them completely shut out for this whole second and most of the third and then only score 1 in the fourth, that's crazy. I mean, this is a team that we've been picking to be in the championship game for weeks now. So I don't, unfortunately, since I didn't get to see it all, I don't know how much of it was defense and goalies versus just flat play. But I definitely saw Poulin make some really good saves. Poulin looked like the goalie that we expected him to be again this year, that for some reason he just wasn't. I was surprised to see Chiliano actually pulled. And the fact that I'm not surprised that he was pulled because he let in that many goals. Yeah, you need to change something up. Sometimes the Mammoths wait too long to do that. But I was surprised in the fact that he just wasn't seeing the ball. So it was very surprising. But this was a really chippy game. I was surprised at some of the cheap shotting that both sides were doing and how it was just getting very chippy. But it looks like it was an interesting game, and I'm really disappointed I didn't get to see the overtime period because it seems like when Edmonton wants to turn it on, they can really turn it on and they can come out strong, but they've developed a bad habit of just kind of sitting back and letting the game go, and their fight isn't in it. And I don't know if that's what's causing that, if they just go in feeling so strong that they're not fighting for it, or if maybe they're just starting to get tired as the season is ending. That I don't know. feel like I'm saying some things that may have been completely different in the second half from the first. So, what about you, Graham?
Yeah, like I said, I didn't see the first half of this game, but I did see, like you said, Mike Poulin was the old Mike Poulin, not the rest of 2015 Mike Poulin. But looking at the numbers again, Ben McIntosh had no points in Game 2, and Mark Matthews had 3 assists and no goals. And I mean, those two numbers right there are big reasons why Calgary was able to win that game. And then, like you said, after you said Tyler, after a 2-minute break between Game 2 and the mini game, they just turned it around. McIntosh scored a goal in the tiebreaker. Matthews scored 2. They scored 2 goals in 45 minutes in Game 2, and then 4 goals in 5 minutes in the tiebreaker. So it just seemed that at some point they realized, okay, we're not going to beat Poulin in this game, so let's just get ready for the tiebreaker. And I'm not sure exactly how they did that, but whatever they did worked. So Edmonton pulls off the tiebreaker 4-1. So they're off to the finals for the second time in 3 years. I guess it was 2 years ago they went to the finals against Rochester. And
I think that was the game. It looked like they swapped jerseys in the locker room because Edmonton dominated, and then it was all Rochester.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But I also did wonder. They had mentioned Robert Church was in after being injured for the past month, and so I kind of wonder if that actually may have thrown off the chemistry a little bit, except for the fact that they did so well in the first quarter. So I don't know, but maybe that was one little factor, is that Church just threw off the chemistry a bit.
Church had 3 goals and an assist. So if it threw off the chemistry, he didn't throw off his own. He threw off everybody else's. It was particularly Ben McIntosh, who, he had 6 shots on goal in Game 2, but no points. So interesting from the West. So heading out east. We had a couple of games in Toronto this past weekend, and I was lucky enough to get to see both of them. Excuse me. So Toronto came in, Rochester came into town, minus Cody Jamieson. Now, I'm assuming he was there, but the fact that he wasn't on the floor was a big deal. They managed to beat Toronto last week without Jamieson. But they had no time to prepare. They just basically went out there, and 5 minutes later he was gone, and they had to make up for that on the fly. Maybe they had too much time to try and prepare a brand new offense without Jamieson, rather than just, oh crap, he's not here, we got to do something. Because the Rochester offense just wasn't really there. Now that said, Brandon Miller was outstanding, and the Toronto defense was great. The whole Toronto team they were just on fire. They came out fired up. They had a 3-0 lead about 3.5 minutes into the game. I think at one point they had, I think they scored 3 goals on their first 3 shots, and 4 goals on their first 5 or something like that. So they just came out on fire. They were obviously keyed up. There was a lot of talk. I saw a lot of talk on Twitter saying that this was obviously for Terry Sanderson, and it looks like whatever John Lovell told them before the game was really working, because they were just really focused. The offense was great. The defense was great. Brandon Miller was great, and Matt Vince was really not. And it wasn't even just that he wasn't making the holy crap kind of saves that we're used to seeing Matt Vince make. He wasn't even making the saves that pretty much any goalie should be making. It's not like the pressure got to him. I mean, he's been the goalie in the championship team the last 3 years. He deals with pressure, okay. So that's not it. So I'm not sure what the deal was with Vince, but he was just not at his best at all. That said, in the second half of that game, Vince was a lot better. And it did kind of look like Toronto took their foot off the gas pedal just a little bit. In that they only scored. I was saying that Edmonton only scored 3 times in the last 3 quarters of their game. Toronto only scored 3 times in the second half of their game as well. So I remember being a little bit nervous there, even knowing that the Rock were going to win Game 2 and then we're going to head to the mini game. I was a little nervous because the Rochester offense was starting to click a little better. The Rock had only scored, like I said, 3 goals in the entire second half. Matt Vince was looking a lot more like the regular Matt Vince. So I was a little worried that going into the mini game, Toronto's confidence might be a little too high, and they may think, "Oh, we kicked their butts in that game. We don't even have to worry too much about the mini game," which would have been a fatal mistake. Luckily, that is totally not what happened. Vince was back to the first half. Toronto's offense was back to the first half offense. They came out on fire again in the mid game. And I think at one point we were looking at this as well. Toronto had 7 goals in less than 7 minutes on 8 shots. And I think they chased Matt Vince after about 6 of those. So it was fairly clear that the minigame was over fairly quickly. Obviously, as a Rock fan, it was a great game. It was very entertaining. I'd imagine in general it was a pretty entertaining game. Tyler, what do you think?
Very entertaining game. The mini game offensive explosion blew my mind. To see it was 6-0 before I think Rochester knew what was happening. I think a lot of that can actually be traced back to the end of regulation. With less than 2 minutes left, Stephen Keogh goes high on some Rock player and gets a penalty. And the first thing I thought is like, I'm pretty sure penalties carry over to the minigame, and they did. So the result was the Rochester had to start the minigame man down, and the Rock took that advantage, walked right down, and scored after they got the face-off or got possession. So that penalty really hurt them. And as that first thing I thought was, all right, if I'm Rochester, I'm basically going to step out of the way and let the Rock score. And then the Rock countered that by saying, we're just going to not score and not release the penalty. Casey Cook is a former AA commissioner, says Rochester just needs to score on themselves and get Keogh out of the box. Don't go to the minigame man down, which makes sense. And I think Kevin or Kyle, I'm pretty sure it's Kevin Gagne, who's an NL referee, says you cannot score on yourself to release a man from the penalty box. So that was a interesting rule that if that had come up, that would have been amazing, especially because he couldn't find a source where it was written down. So if they'd done that, and maybe like Vince was like pointing back to his team when they had possession, he's like, put it in the net, put it in the net. And so not everybody knew that rule, not the players. I don't know if all the refs would have been on the same page. That would have been kind of just a total gong show if they didn't know how to call that if it had happened. It reminded me of a situation from the MSL a few years back where at the end of the regular season there's some tiebreaker scenario, and I think Colin Doyle, you see it with Brampton or Six Nations, I think it was Six Nations, so it was just a couple years ago. They basically went down at the end of regulation of the third period and scored an own goal to set up a tiebreaker to get a more favorable playoff matchup. So you've definitely seen teams, if they're aware of the situation, scoring themselves, but it wouldn't have helped them in this situation, even though I thought it would have, and several players thought it would have. I don't know. It was a great game. Stephen Keogh at the end of the game was just phenomenal in the fourth quarter. He had 4 or 5 goals. He ended up with 6, I think. Yeah, he definitely had 6, if I recall correctly, and one of that which was him falling to his stomach, realizing he still had the ball, and shooting and scoring from his stomach after basically rolling once or something. He was on fire, and the Rock couldn't stop him, and has probably put a lot of fear in Graham that they're just going to carry that momentum into the mini game and get on a roll and hold on to their title. I really thought that Rochester would. I had picked them to win this game, and I thought they'll have the grit, even without Jameson, to win a 10-minute game, because really they had to play the 10-minute game in order for the Rock to win. So either they're going to win on their own or they're going to play a 10-minute game. And I thought they may not win the whole game without Jameson, but they could do 10 great minutes, and they completely did not. Let me see if I got all my notes here. Yeah, that was it. It was a, I don't know, great game to watch, probably a great game to be at. What do you think of this one, Melissa?
This one was interesting. I was really surprised by Vince that it seemed like he wasn't seeing the ball. I mean, there was quite a few shots from both teams where they were using their defender as a screen. And I apologize if I'm a little distracted. We have a major thunderstorm, and one of my dogs that's like 75 pounds keeps pushing under my desk. So, just so you know. But yeah, it seemed like he wasn't seeing the ball at all. It didn't seem like, whether it was near, far, left, right, he just didn't seem to be seeing it. And since we've come to expect such solid play from him, it was even more surprising. It's just kind of like what we were talking about with Chiliano, that, wait, what's going on here? And then the goal from Keogh was definitely a phenomenal one, where he kind of did a little barrel roll and then stopped in the shot, and it just was perfect. Couldn't have asked for better. I also thought it was very interesting that the mini game score and the first half score were very nearly identical. I actually thought they were going to be, and then dang it, 3 seconds left, Rochester scored to make them different. But they did look like essentially the same first half team that we'd seen earlier. It was a 10-minute game. So they definitely lost their fire or something, because they were looking good the second half. They looked like they might make a game of it at the very least. So to see Toronto go up 6-0 in the 10-minute before it was like even 5 minutes off the clock, it just seemed like it was going to be Toronto. I think that's all I have, because I'm getting a little too distracted. Sorry.
One thing to the comment you made, Tyler, about the penalty carrying over and how they should have scored on themselves to release that. I actually did look through the 2015 NLL rulebook to see if there's any kind of rule in there specifically saying you are not allowed to score on yourself, or if you do, it has nothing to do with the penalty or won't release the penalty. And the closest I found was just something saying, if while a team is on a penalty kill and is actually a man down, the opposing team scores a goal, then one of the penalties is released. You could interpret that to say if the other team scores the goal, not if you score on yourself. But I think it's sufficiently vague that, I mean, either way, the other team is credited with scoring a goal. So it's probably vague enough that that's not going to hold up. But I did read somewhere somebody saying that the league actually sent out a memo to all the teams. I don't know if it was during the playoffs or prior to the playoffs or sometime fairly recently, either telling them or reminding them that if you score on yourself in order to release the penalty, you will be given another penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct. So I don't know if that would have released the penalty and then they would have got another one, or if they actually would have been 2 men down. But like you said, that would have been interesting to see. So we're done with the mini games for this year. So
sorry, one more thing. In the overtime period with Toronto, their 5th goal was completely crazy amazing, because Sanderson passed one-handed with a defender like practically wrapped around him to Crowley, who caught it one-handed and then almost did like a quick stick right into the goal. So it's like you had a one-handed pass, one-handed catch, one-handed shot, and that was kind of just, wow, crazy. You don't normally see a goal like that. So wanted to get that out there because that was definitely a highlight reel goal that we hadn't mentioned yet.
Okay. And one other topic we wanted to talk about, seeing as we're talking about the minigame anyway, is the current playoff format working, or should we go back to one and done? Or what other changes would you like to see? Melissa, you proposed this topic, so I'll let you go first.
Well, we've definitely discussed that as a fan, we're not really fond of this format, but I'm also starting to feel in some ways that we're watching the teams really manipulate this format, and so I don't think it's working. I think if they're going to do a 2-game thing, then maybe they need to keep them in the same city, and it's back-to-back games, literally Friday, Saturday night, or Saturday, Sunday, however they need to do it, and it's in whoever the dominant team. And yeah, that sucks for the other team's fans that they can't actually host a game, but having this whole week apart, it's like a completely different game. I think the teams are starting to find ways to manipulate it. In the Toronto-Rochester game, the announcers said at one point that Toronto was starting to pull off some of their top players to rest them in preparation for the mini game. It drives me nuts that if a penalty is in the regular game, that it's carrying over to the mini game. I just think that's wrong. I think if you're really going to have this tiebreaker mini game, then it should be a whole new game, or you might as well just call it an overtime period. Just plain and simple. But I'm really not liking this current format. Especially with the week apart, I think it's really killing the momentum, and it can definitely have more of an impact on the outcome, I think, than it should. What do you think, Tyler?
I love the playoffs more than one and done. I don't love how long it's taking. I mean, we're looking at potentially 3 more weeks of games, I think. Or is it just one and then 2 games next weekend after this, no matter what? I don't even know. But that's after we are 3 weeks into the playoffs. The playoffs used to be done in 4 weeks, I think, if that. So they were quick. Remember the Stealth won their title, and it was at least a week ago. It was May 15th. They had won the title, and we won't know the NL title this year until like June 15th, something like that. That's what I'm not liking. I do love that the teams get the chance to shake off one bad game, but they don't have the power to get the date. They need to do it on the same weekend. And they have to play back-to-back games during the regular season. I think doing it back-to-back constantly in the playoffs would be pretty rough. By the time they get to the finals, these guys will be exhausted, and that would make for poor quality. So that's a downside to my argument. But it's taken too long, and I don't have a solid counter to that other than saying I like the playoffs, but I don't. I like the playoff formats. And that's all I got. What do you think, Graham?
Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy the minigame in that it's exciting to watch. But I saw the championship game in Rochester last year, which was awesome, and then the game this past weekend against Rochester, which was awesome. So I mean, they're really exciting to watch. And I had a bit of a conversation over Twitter with Casey Cook, who you mentioned a minute ago, and Lewis Ratcliffe, talking about the minigame, and Lewis said that he just hates this format because 10 minutes is too short a time to decide a whole season. And I made the point that, well, regardless of what happens, if there's a tie, it could come down to 10 minutes. If you're playing a best of 3 and it's tied with 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter of Game 3, then both seasons come down to those 10 minutes. If you're playing the best of 7 and it comes down to the last 10 minutes, then the whole season comes down to 10 minutes. It's the same thing. But thinking about it some more, I don't think it's the same thing. I mean, it only happens if it's tied, but if you say, okay, well, we'll play the whole regular season, and then instead of the playoffs, we'll just play a 10-minute mini game between the top two teams, and that will be the championship final. That'll whoever wins that wins the cup. And at that point, you say, well, no, because 10 minutes isn't enough to decide the whole season. So that's why it's not the same thing. It's play a full game, play a second full game, and then play a little mini game to decide. That mini game isn't enough. And I think I've changed my mind, and I agree with Mr. Ratcliffe and Cook. At the same time, I think a best of three series would probably be the ideal, but like you said, Tyler, it's taking an awfully long time, and the finals will go 3 separate weekends. So Game 1 will be this coming Saturday, Game 2 will be the next Friday, and Game 3, if necessary, will be the next Saturday. So it's another 3 weeks for the finals. And yeah, we're into the middle of June. By the time the NLL finals are over, a good chunk of the MLL season is done. So any players who want to play in both, I guess they've always had to decide because there's some overlap in the seasons. But now that the overlap is most of the season, they may like, I don't know if there's MLL rules saying if you only play in 3 games, you can't play in the playoffs. The NLL doesn't seem to have that rule, but there may be other issues with that. I mean, if you're new to a team, how do you form team chemistry with 2 games before going into the playoffs? So there's all kinds of issues there. And then players that are playing in the MLL or NLL are also missing the MSL and WLA seasons because they can't play in both at the same time. So the later it goes, the worse it seems to get for everybody. I mean, like you said, I love the playoffs and I love watching all the games, but it does seem to go on too long. I can't say I'm a big fan of the one and done, so maybe if they were to do one and done for the first 2 rounds and then best of 3 in the finals, or 1 game for the division semifinals like they did this year, and then best of 3 series for the other 2, as long as they can compress a little. So either games 1 and 2 are the same weekend, or games 2 and 3 are the same weekend, or something along those lines. And I think we talked about this at the beginning of this season when we found that the finals were going to be best of 3. Rather than having it home team or number 1 seed gets game 1 and 3, they should have had it number 1 seed gets games 2 and 3, so that for one they might be able to do it on back-to-back days with no travel in between. But also, like we talked about before, if Toronto wins this weekend, and then and being the higher seed, you kind of think they have the advantage. I'm not sure that's the case here, but in any case, if they win this weekend, they're going to win the title on the road, and nobody wants that. So it'd be better, I think, if the number 1 seed were able to, as part of their prize for being the number 1 seed, they got to win, or they got to host games 2 and 3.
As a fan, are you
So
going to go to games on Friday and Saturday night, or Saturday and Sunday?
Me personally, yes, for sure, but a lot of people wouldn't. So yeah, I do wonder how that would play out in terms of attendance. I mean, like I said, I'd certainly go, but I don't know if I'd be in the minority there. And in terms of walk-ups, I mean, you may get the season ticket holders going to both, but you're not going to get people off the street going, hey, let's go to a lacrosse game, and let's go to another one tomorrow.
Yeah, the second game that was not known if it was going to happen, boy, that walk-up would just be, I think, horrific. They'd have probably terrible attendance. That's so a little downside there.
Yeah,
Devil's advocate over here.
Well, but you also got to figure, you're getting into summer, what else you're competing against? I mean, if the Mammoth actually would have been hosting one of these games, that arena actually would have probably been very empty because everybody would have gone to see the DU game. And then Comic-Con was in town this weekend, and, you know, there's other leagues, and like you said, with the WLA and the MLL, and there's so much conflict that I think they're, by extending the season as far as they are starting to kill some of the momentum and desire for the game. I mean, it's very interesting when you look at, without the mini games and stuff, that we actually would be looking at an Edmonton Rush and Rochester Nighthawk championship game instead, But because of the mini games, we got Edmonton and we have Toronto. Definitely changes it, but it's really hard. Like you were saying, Tyler, I remember basically the Mammoth won the championship game on my birthday. I just happened to be out of the country. But to know that it was done by mid-May and it was great, and now we're looking into June. It's like people want to start getting their summers going and not necessarily be watching the games. And so if they're going to keep with this format, they need to do something to make this simpler. They're just stretching it out too far. And, we don't want fans to not care. And if you can't get fans to care in some of the big arenas like the Mammoth, because I know in previous playoff games, when we actually had a good season going in, the playoffs were always poorly attended in comparison to the rest of the season. And that's just because you start getting into college finals and high school final games and some of the tournaments and things like that, and you're just going to lose a chunk of your audience because they actually play lacrosse, or it's because it's summer.
Yeah, it's funny that it seems like the league is saying, look, more lacrosse, more lacrosse, more lacrosse. We're going to extend the season. We're going to extend the playoffs. You get more, more, more. And counterintuitively, that's not really what they should be doing. And I don't think they should be cutting the season down. Like if they want to go back to 16 games, I'd probably be okay with that. I'm fine with 18. But until there's significant changes in the league, they shouldn't be going any further than 18. And extending the playoffs doesn't seem to have been a good idea either. Yeah, like you said, it's just going too long. And I know my wife, who's not a huge lacrosse fan, is looking at this going, are you still doing lacrosse? Is it still going on? Good Lord. And I said, yeah, it's only maybe another 2 or 3 weeks. And it's like, usually I thought it was over by now. Yeah, it used to be. But, yeah, okay, so that was a good discussion. On to our predictions from last week. How did we do last week? I was 2-0. Look at that. In fact, if you look at my, well, I guess you won't be able to look at them because I think they have them wrong on the website, but all the Isle Indoor writers are submitting their picks for each game as well. And they were adamant that last week we don't just pick who we're going to win the series, which is what we did here. We actually pick who we're going to win each individual game. And so I got all 4 right. I said Toronto was going to win Game 2 and the mini game, and I picked Calgary to win Game 2, but then Edmonton to win the mini game there, and so I'm 4-0. So we'll call, well, since we did it differently here, I picked Toronto and Edmonton to win their series, so I'm 2-0 last week, which makes me 5-1 overall. Melissa was also 2-0 last week, and she is now 4-2 overall. And Tyler was close. I believe you actually picked Toronto to win Game 2 and then Rochester win the mini game.
Yep.
That ends up being 0-1 actually. So Tyler was 1-1 last week, and he is 2-4 overall. So Tyler, I will let you go first on who will win Game 1 of the finals.
Boy, the Rock have all sorts of motivation because they're playing for Terry Sanderson, and it shows at times, but they can be beat. So I'm picking Edmonton to sneak out this first game, and then Toronto will probably clean up the series. But Edmonton can sneak in this first game is my pick. What do you have, Melissa?
Man, this was tough. I think this was one of the toughest picks we've had. I could make such a strong case for either team why they would win or lose, and I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I'm still not completely confident in my pick, which doesn't happen as often. I'm picking Toronto, and part of that is because Edmonton can start really strong and then back off. And I just think that they haven't faced a team like Toronto in a few weeks, and so that if they do that again, that's going to hurt them. But both times these guys have faced one another, it was really great, crazy good game. So I'm really looking forward to it either way, but I think I'm going to go with Toronto. What about you, Graham?
Yeah, I'm with you, Melissa, in multiple ways. First of all, I'm also picking Toronto. But I'm also conflicted about it. Yeah, I wasn't sure about this one. Um, Edmonton obviously has been an outstanding team this year and last year. Um, Last year they were great defensively and good enough offensively. This year they're great both in both cases, and of course Aaron Bold is Aaron Bold. So this is going to be a really good goaltending matchup. Um, Toronto's defense plays this week the way they played last week. Uh, they can match up against Edmonton, um, and I'd put Toronto's offense up against anybody. So this is going to be one heck of a game. I'm really looking forward to it. But just seeing how dominant the Rock were last weekend, and how they came out of the first quarter looking like we're going to score 50 goals in this game, um, and then how they came out again in the mini game with the same intensity as in the first quarter. Um, I don't know if they can do that 2 weeks in a row, or if 3 is the case, maybe, as they'll need it next week as well. But just seeing how intense they were in that game, I'm gonna go with the Rock, and yeah, like I said, this is going to be an exciting game. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. Both teams kind of had the second game very similar. They both started out really strong in the first half, didn't play as strong in the second half, and then just came out and really killed it in the mini game. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how they actually do against one another, since we haven't seen them play, what, in a month now, I guess? I'm losing track of time, maybe 6 weeks. So it's going to be interesting because their opponents struggled in very, very different ways. So I cannot wait to watch this game.
All right. Yeah, that'll do it for this week. Addicted to Lacrosse is where you want to go. AddictedToLacrosse.com, sorry, is where you want to go for all of our old shows. You can find us on Twitter at Lax Podcast. You can find us on Facebook at Lax Podcast. Or you can send us email at feedback@addictedtolacrosse.com and let us know what you think about the show, or ask us any questions. And yeah, any kind of feedback you want to give us is absolutely welcome. That's about it. This has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.